Hi, my name is Pat, and this is my channel, Book Chat with Pat, and I'm glad that you're here. Today is Thursday, April 18th, and I'm going to be doing another Poetry Thursday episode, focusing today on the American poet Billy Collins. Billy Collins is a contemporary poet and possibly the most popular poet in the United States today. He's known for his accessible, conversational style and for his often profound observations about everyday life and also about literature and the process of reading and writing poetry itself. He also often writes with a wry sense of humor. To date, Collins has published 12 volumes of poetry, and he has edited 2 poetry anthologies. I have a couple of his books here. This is one of his volumes of poetry. This is another. This is a collection of new and selected poems from all of his previous volumes. And this is the first anthology that he edited, Poetry 180, and also 180 more. And I'm going to talk about these anthologies in a little bit. Billy Collins was born in 1941 in New York City. He did his undergraduate studies at the College of the Holy Cross, and he earned both his MA and his PhD at the University of California, Riverside. He's the co-founder of the Mid-Atlantic Review, along with Michael Shannon. He has taught at Columbia University, Sarah Lawrence, Lehman College of the City University of New York system, and also at the State University of New York, Stony Brook. Additionally, he is a senior distinguished fellow at Winter Park Institute in Florida. Billy Collins was the Poet Laureate of the United States from 2001 through 2003. And he was also the New York State Poet Laureate from 2004 through 2006. In his work as Poet Laureate of the United States, he edited the 2 anthologies that I just showed, Poetry 180, A Turning Back to Poetry, and 180 More Extraordinary Poems for Everyday Life. In the introduction to the former volume, Collins writes about the origin of the series. In his role as Poet Laureate, he found himself on a circuit of poetry readings in schools around the country. In one school south of Chicago, he had been invited to the school's Poetry Day as the featured poet. A student approached him with a copy of a newspaper article that she had written about poetry. He said that he found quote, a memorable summary of the discomfort so many people seem to experience with poetry in her article. The student had written, quote, whenever I read a modern poem, it's like my brother has his foot on the back of my neck in the swimming pool. Collins goes on to say that Poetry 180 was inspired by the desire to remove poetry far from such scenes of torment. The printed collections come from the Library of Congress 180 website that he had created in order to assemble a collection of poems that anyone could read and understand on a first reading. This was part of a national initiative that he had created Poetry 180, a poem a day for high school students. The idea behind this was to show students that poetry can be a part of everyday life and not just a subject studied in school. He asked teachers and school administrators to find a way to incorporate at least one poem a day into the life of the school, one for each day of the school year, lasting roughly 180 days. He wanted students to have the experience of hearing poetry every day without any pressure to respond, to analyze, to interpret, and these 2 volumes came out of that project. Billy Collins had also been asked in his official capacity as poet laureate to write a poem commemorating the first anniversary of the fall of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center on September 11th. The reading that he gave was in front of a joint session of Congress. Among the honors and distinctions that Collins has earned, in addition to the state and national poet laureate positions, are fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and the National Endowment of the Arts, Poet of the Year designation from Poetry Magazine, the American Irish Historical Society Cultural Award, the Mark Twain Award for Humor in Poetry, the Norman Mailer Poetry Prize, the Donald Hall and Jane Kenyon Prize in American Poetry, recognition by the New York Public Library as a literary lion, and induction into the American Academy of Arts and Letters. I had the great fortune of hearing Billy Collins read his poetry live on 3 occasions. When I was teaching, I would regularly take a group of students to the Dodge Poetry Festival, which occurs every other year. These days, the festival is held in Newark, New Jersey, at the New Jersey Performing Arts Center. The festival always sets aside one day, Friday, as High School Students' Day. On 2 occasions, my students were able to hear Billy Collins read. On both occasions, he read one of the poems that we had studied in class, which was an incredible thing for my students to behold. I also heard him read on another occasion at the South Orange Performing Arts Center. On to his poetry. I'd like to read a few representative samples of his work. The first poem that I'm going to read is called Introduction to Poetry, in which he recommends how to read a poem while warning us not to beat the poem to death in looking for what it means. Introduction to Poetry. I ask them to take a poem and hold it up to the light like a color slide, or press an ear against its hive. I say, drop a mouse into a poem and watch him probe his way out, or walk inside the poem's room and feel the walls for a light switch. I want them to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving at the author's name on the shore. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with rope and torture a confession out of it. They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really means. Next, I'm going to read my favorite of his poems to teach. It's a poem about a son's relationship with his mother as he reflects as a grown man on his efforts in childhood to show gratitude to his mother through the gift of a lanyard that he had made. As a way into this poem when I was teaching, before we studied it, before we even read it, I used to have students write brief personal narratives about gifts that they had made as children for their parents. We would share our personal stories of gift giving to parents when we were little and parents' reactions to those gifts. Then we would read the poem and then listen to Billy Collins read it. Students almost always had a powerful reaction to this poem. The Lanyard. Excuse me. The Lanyard. The other day, I was ricocheting slowly off the blue walls of this room, moving as if underwater, from typewriter to piano, from bookshelf to an envelope lying on the floor, when I found myself in the L section of the dictionary, where my eyes fell upon the word lanyard. No cookie nibbled by a French novelist could send one into the past more suddenly. A past where I sat at a workbench, at a camp, by a deep Adirondack lake, learning how to braid long, thin plastic strips into a lanyard, a gift for my mother. I had never seen anyone use a lanyard, or wear one, if that's what you did with them. But that did not keep me from crossing strand over strand again and again until I had made a boxy red and white lanyard for my mother. She gave me life and milk from her breasts, and I gave her a lanyard. She nursed me in many a sick room, lifted spoons of medicine to my lips, laid cold face cloths on my forehead, and then led me out into the airy light and taught me to walk and swim. And I, in turn, presented her with a lanyard. "Here are thousands of meals," she said, "and here is clothing and a good education." "And here is your lanyard," I replied, which I made with a little help from a counselor. "Here is a breathing body and a beating heart, strong legs, bones and teeth, and 2 clear eyes to read the world," she whispered. "And here," I said, "is the lanyard I made at camp. And here I wish to say to her now is a smaller gift, not the worn truth that you can never repay your mother, but the rueful admission that when she took the 2-tone lanyard from my hand, I was as sure as a boy could be that this useless, worthless thing I wove out of boredom would be enough to make us even. Another poem that I love to teach, and that I would often try to teach on one of those early first days of spring, is a poem called Today. Today. If ever there were a spring day so perfect, so uplifted by a warm, intermittent breeze that it made you want to throw open all the windows in the house and unlatch the door to the canary's cage, indeed, rip the little door from its jamb, a day when the cool brick paths, and the garden bursting with peonies seemed so etched in sunlight that you felt like taking a hammer to the glass paperweight on the living room end table, releasing the inhabitants from their snow-covered cottage so they could walk out holding hands and squinting into this larger dome of blue and white. Well, today is just that kind of day. Next and finally, I would like to share the poem that Billy Collins wrote for the first anniversary of the fall of the Twin Towers, which was delivered to a joint session of Congress. The names for the victims of September 11th and their survivors. Yesterday, I lay awake in the palm of the night. A soft rain stole in, unhelped by any breeze. And when I saw the silver glaze on the windows, I started with A, with Ackerman as it happened, then Baxter and Calabro, Davis and Eberling, names falling into place as droplets fell through the dark. Names printed on the ceiling of the night. Names slipping around a watery bend. 26 willows on the banks of a stream. In the morning, I walked out barefoot among thousands of flowers, heavy with dew like the eyes of tears, and each had a name, Fiore inscribed on a yellow petal. Then Gonzalez and Hahn, Ishikawa and Jenkins, names written in the air and stitched into the cloth of the day, a name under a photograph taped to a mailbox, monogram on a torn shirt. I see you spelled out on storefront windows and on the bright unfurled awnings of this city. I say the syllables as I turn a corner. Kelly and Lee, Medina, Nardello, and O'Connor. When I peer into the woods, I see a thick tangle where letters are hidden, as in a puzzle concocted for children. Parker and Quigley. In the twigs of an ash, Rizzo, Schubert, Torres, and Upton. Secrets in the boughs of an ancient maple. Names written in the pale sky. Names rising in the updraft amid buildings. Names silent in stone or cried out behind a door. Names blown over the earth and out to sea in the evening. Weakening light, the last swallows. A boy on a lake lifts his oars. A woman by a window puts a match to a candle, and the names are outlined on the rose clouds, Vanacore and Wallace. Let X stand, if it can, for the ones unfound. Then Young and Zeminski, the final jolt of Z. Names etched on the head of a pin. One name spanning a bridge, another undergoing a tunnel, a blue name needled into the skin, names of citizens, workers, mothers and fathers, the bright-eyed daughter, the quick son, alphabet of names in a green field, names in the small tracks of birds, names lifted from a hat or balanced on the tip of the tongue, names wheeled into the dim warehouse of memory. So many names, there is barely room on the walls of the heart. As always, I thank you for watching. I hope that you're doing well. I'll speak with you again soon. Take care.